Hi, my name is Katy Malone. I'm the Curator of Academic Programs at the McClung Museum at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and this is another How to Read an Object video. This time we're going to be talking about repatriation with a special guest, Dr. Ellen Lofaro. Welcome, Dr. Lofaro.
Hi, Katy. Thank you. My name is Ellen Lofaro, and I'm the Director of Repatriation for the University of Tennessee. I'm also the Curator of Archaeology for the Anthropology Department here.
So what exactly does repatriation mean?
Repatriation has many meanings, but sort of more broadly, repatriation means returning an object or a person to their country of origin. In a museum setting, this often applies to objects or human remains that are housed by a museum, which are requested to be returned by descendant communities or home countries.
What are some of the ways that museums get objects that need to be repatriated?
There are a variety of ways that museums can get objects that need repatriation. Unfortunately, there is a dark colonial history surrounding many museum collections, especially from the 1500s onwards, tied into European exploration and colonization efforts. Museum collections in Europe grew exponentially. Some items were purchased legally or transferred, but others were taken under threat of violence, coercion, in ways that violated cultural traditions or were simply stolen or looted during war. In the late 1800s, the practice of archaeology increased significantly in the United States, which led to the excavation of hundreds of thousands of Native American graves and sites. Protests by Indigenous people and communities were generally ignored. However, following decades of concerted activism and the civil rights movement, in 1990, the U.S. Congress passed the Native American Graves, Protection, and Repatriation Act, McClung, which creates a pathway for lineal descendants and tribes to reclaim ancestral remains and certain types of objects from federal agencies, and also any institutions that receive federal funding, such as museums and universities. SNAGPRA is human rights legislation, and here at UT, SNAGPRA is a huge part of my responsibilities. SNAGPRA is simply one part of repatriation, though.
How does repatriation get started?
Repatriation typically starts with a request from a community or a lineal descendant, although museums can also reach out and initiate the repatriation process. But I'd say in general, it usually comes from the community to the museum.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what SNAGPRA actually is?
SNAGPRA is a law that requires institutions to create inventories of ancestral Native American remains and funerary objects, and also summaries of other types of objects as defined by the law, which include sacred objects and patrimonial objects. It also requires consultation with Native American tribes to determine cultural affiliation. Then a notice with these findings is published in the Federal Record, which is the daily federal newspaper. This is considered to be a mandatory reporting. It's not optional. After 30 days have passed, if the museum receives no counterclaims, the ancestral remains and/or objects that are listed in the notice are to be transferred to the claimant tribe or tribes or lineal descendants.
So that's here in the United States, and that's the law in the United States. But what does repatriation look like globally?
Well, repatriation globally is also complicated. Everywhere has different laws and regulations. And there are certainly different expectations and opinions on what repatriation, should and does end up looking like. One of the more well-known sort of controversial examples is that between the British Museum and the Greek government over the Elgin marbles, which are sculptures that Lord Elgin, some would say, took from the Parthenon in Greece in the early 1800s. Others say they were taken under a permit and brought back to the British Museum. So the British Museum believes they have clear title because of Lord Elgin's permit, The Greek government and other institutions disagree, and they have requested the return of these marbles since the 1980s. So there are all sorts of complications, international laws tied into global repatriation, but there are also many wonderful examples of successful repatriations internationally.
So can you tell us about one of your success stories?
One success story that comes to mind is right here at the McClung Museum at the University of Tennessee. We are working with the Oban Society, a nonprofit organization, to repatriate a Japanese good luck flag. These flags were traditional gifts for Japanese servicemen who were deployed overseas during World War II. It was the national flag of Japan, signed by friends and family, often with short messages wishing good luck and safety. After World War II, many American soldiers returned home with trophies of war, including these flags. However, today, more and more of these flags are being returned by museums and organizations to the families of the soldiers they belong to. And so we learned of the Oban Society's work in early 2000 and initiated conversations with this organization about the possible repatriation of the flag. And we are very excited that this is now moving forward. And once the flag is transferred to the Oban Society, they will begin the hard work of trying to translate all of the messages on the flag and then track down hopefully the family of the deceased servicemen in order to return the flag to them. And if that is not possible, they will likely return it to a local shrine in the hometown of the area of the person who owned the flag.
That's incredible. That's a really heartwarming story. So is something like that really your personal goal? What do you see as the end product of repatriation overall?
I see repatriation in many ways as righting wrongs, as human rights work, and also sort of trying to build new bridges and build better ways to work together. For going back to the Japanese good luck flags, for those families who lost often their sons in war, the flags are the only physical remains of the loved ones that they lost. And for many Japanese, those flags are living objects that contain the spirits of their ancestors. So the flag is not only an important sort of international act of reconciliation, but a sense of closure for the families. And for, especially with NAGPRA work, where we are also returning Native American ancestral remains and funerary belongings to their descendant communities. That sort of work is difficult and hard, but also hopefully healing in the end.
So why does repatriation take so long, and why is it so difficult?
Repatriation is complicated, and even with legislation like NAGPRA, you still have to take each repatriation on a case-by-case basis. There's different rules and regulations with international ones or local or national. And some museums have also been accused of dragging out the repatriation process when they're unable to stop it entirely. Some museums are not open to repatriation. For those that are, it can depend on staff availability, the number of other ongoing repatriations, and often the status of legal approvals and paperwork. So sometimes it happens quickly, and sometimes it can take many years.
Why do some museums resist repatriation, and what do you think about that?
Again, there are a variety of reasons why different museums resist repatriation, and I will just say before I start, I am not in favor of that. But it certainly is still an ongoing issue around the world today, and some of the more common reasons that I have heard include a desire to document the past and sort of preserve cultural heritage for everyone, for future generations, for posterity. Others are worried about empty shelves, that there will be nothing in museums. Personally, and I think there's also certainly splits between what is legal and what is ethical. So often what is legally mandated or legally stated in laws or in policies for a museum. I am not an expert on international laws and policies, but there are certain European countries whose national museums pretty much say that deaccessioning is not allowed because of, in order to conserve and preserve objects for posterity. But often these objects, and especially human remains that are being housed and requested by museums and then requested for repatriation, there are bigger ethical concerns. And when we think of the idea of free, prior, and informed consent, and how that is not the case when there are title issues, or there was war looting, or burials were dug up and excavated without permission of the descendant communities, or objects were taken, but countries and governments disagree over what happened. I think now is the time that a lot more museums are sort of taking a step back and trying to reconsider their collections and their objects and human remains and where they came from, and is it ethical to continue to house them, even if they do have what looks like legal title or provenance to those objects. And repatriation is a large part of that process. And Indigenous communities and activists have been sort of instrumental in trying to get museums and museum practitioners to reconsider these ideas. And I think there's also now a shift between that sort of historical idea of a museum as a museum documenting the past, and thinking about instead, how can a museum interact with the current generations and be ways to represent, modern artists as well as historical and other objects.
So thank you so much for sharing so much. And my final question is, how did you get your role here at the University of Tennessee?
When I was first in college, I had learned about repatriation in classes, mostly briefly about NAGPRA, but I certainly could not have expected having the role that I have today. I went to graduate school. I have a master's and a PhD in anthropology with a focus on both museum collections and also bioarchaeology, which is the study of human remains from archaeology sites. When I was in graduate school at the University of Florida, I spent 6 years working at the Florida Museum of Natural History as the bioarchaeology and NAGPRA assistant. So I worked on NAGPRA inventories, I assisted with field record research and documentation, did very exciting things like database entry, and ultimately ended up learning a huge amount about repatriation and NAGPRA by doing this work. Which was only sort of briefly covered. It might be a short discussion in a class I was taking, but I was very lucky to get hands-on experience doing this type of work. And when I graduated, I made the point of looking for jobs with opportunities where I could continue this type of work. And I was lucky that the University of Tennessee advertised a position that was the Curator of Archaeology and also the NAGPRA coordinator for the anthropology department. So I was able to take my skill sets, which were actually very different from what I did my master's and PhD theses and dissertation on, and channel that into this new position. I became the Director of Repatriation this past year. I think in the past 4 years, we've seen the importance of NAGPRA and repatriation work as well here at the University of Tennessee. And we are doing our best to move everything here forward and work proactively with Native American communities, international communities.
So I want to thank Dr. Lofaro for joining me today and for providing so much information about repatriation. As you can see, we just started this conversation, and Dr. Lofaro has provided a number of really good resources that I will list on our website should you want to learn more about repatriation. Thank you for joining me today for another How to Read an Object video. This has been Katy Malone, the Curator of Academic Programs at the McClung Museum at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.